Hi Hawthorne Sycamore, I'm going to read the next part of our class reader. We're still completing the Skylarks War by Hilary McKay and we are on chapter 34. It's now autumn in 1917, so if you remember, the war is still a year away from finishing. Chapter 34, A Dog Called Rupert. Simon, the bony one, reached France by way of ship from Southampton in the autumn of 1917. "I'm here," he wrote to Rupert the day he arrived, crouched in a crate of tinned beef that looked like it had been abandoned by the roadside for years. "I can see now why no one says much about it at home. I keep thinking I see you. It would be nice to bump into you." Had he said too much? Nothing was private in the army except the space inside your head. If you died, they got your letters out of your pockets and read them. And these last few days, he started talking in his sleep again, it seemed. "Who's Rupert?" they asked, but he got out of that quick as a flash. "My dog," he replied, "Golden Lab." He'd turned the talk to dogs very successfully. Dog stories had come pouring out from their dozen listeners. "You're allowed to love your dog." "You were shouting for your dog again last night," his neighbour remarked a few days later. "Sorry," he said, completely casual. "I dream about him a lot. I dream he's lost." "I dream I'm lost," said his neighbour, and Simon nodded and said, "Yes, I do that too." Back to the letter. How not to sound desperate. "France seems a bit busy," he wrote. It was a bit busy. Miles back from the lines, the ground throbbed with the pounding of the guns at the front. It was terrible seeing the horses knee-deep, toiling their carts, slipping sideways. They were moving back the wounded as fast as they could. Never for one moment did Simon wonder where he'd come, nor was it worse than where he thought he would be. He guessed it would be very much nearly endurable. And it very nearly was. His feet were agony. They didn't seem to make boots his size. Already he'd seen things he never knew he'd ever tell. A cartload of dead men, loose-limbed, turned blackish. He hadn't known that happened. "They're all Australian," someone said, as if that explained anything. He never thought of the grave digging, but then he'd never thought of rum. It was very helpful stuff, he decided. He was nearer to Rupert than he'd been 4 years. It rained and rained. 3 days after landing, they sent him to the front. He had a pack weighing nearly 60 pounds his back, and a rifle that he'd only fired half a dozen times. Round his neck was Rupert's spare key to the cricket pavilion, along with his dog tags, so they'd know who he was when he died. The dog tags were made of asbestos, so they wouldn't burn if he burned. There was a red one to be taken off his body and a green one to be left on. Whenever he reached the point where he believed he could not stand the misery for a single hour longer, he thought of Rupert, who had stuck it out for more than 2 years. Peter was now at Oxford studying biomedical sciences. The consequence of jumping off a moving train, an adaptable brain and an accidental running into the Regis Professor of Medicine while getting a photograph copied. He was so busy he hardly had time to look up from his work. But when the news came that Simon was going to France, he spared a moment to drop his head on his arms and remember his friend. A long letter came from Clary. He could picture her writing it, in her room at the top of the cold, narrow house. He shouldn't have gone there. He needn't have. What use would Simon be with a gun? He used to walk around ants, he was so kind. "It isn't fair. Mrs. Morgan says if anything happens to him, it's for the best. She says life isn't easy for boys like him. I'm never speaking to her again." Chapter 35. Grandfather and Grandmother. In Cornwall, Clary's grandfather's chest had almost got the better of him at last. He had pneumonia. He was drifting in and out, awake and asleep, slowly drowning. "Had enough," he said, still cold. Still could wish for one more summer, skylark time, I used to think. Hear them singing over the moor. Know I'd be off to the station. "Always late," said his wife. "Hardly ever. There they be, our own skylarks, little Clary and the boys." "Grown up now," said Clary's grandmother. "How we used to complain about them coming, and now we wish for them back." "Never complain about them." "Oh, you did. The upheaval, the houseful, the dramas, Clary nearly drowning, Peter's leg. They were no trouble. You didn't say that when Rupert ran away to Ireland. Well, or when Clary kidnapped Lucy." "She was right," he said, sighing. "Don't know what I was thinking of. Silly." "Silly," she agreed, and bent and kissed his forehead. "Had this chest a long time." "You have. Got over it before, many times." "Many," she agreed. "My love to our skylarks, all 3. Of course." Chapter 36. Behind the front line. Simon, the bony one's letter to Rupert arrived when he was a few miles behind the front line on the last evening of the 3-day break. He hardly read letters from home anymore, but this one wasn't from England. It was just a few miles away, battered from being carried around in a pocket, slightly damp and thumb-marked with mud. Rupert stared at it incredulously, recognising the handwriting of an all-too-familiar Simon Bonington. Bonners, the bony one, that borderline pest from the past. the past, school, that lost world, Peter, Simon, Mad Irish, whom he had carefully forgotten. Once, long ago, in a different life, he had saved the bony one by means of his Mad Irish friend. Don't start going back. Don't start going back, Rupert begged his weeping memory. Don't start. Let's find a drink. Let's find a bottle. Anything. But still, it started. Long before, when the red-haired Irish boy Michael had been dispatched to England in order to toughen up for the army, he had to suffer a certain amount of agony, as all the new ones did. Each of them had something that made them stand out, and with Michael it was his Irishness and his way of comparing his present dismal circumstances to his previous carefree life. There was one particular pack of boys who were especially talented at making life unhappy for people different to themselves. One day, one of them was inspired to stand behind Michael and begin an Irish song. It was a shot straight to Michael's homesick heart. They all saw him flinch, and so they began to torment him with the Irish ballads. They sang them behind him as he stood in front of the notice boards, reading every word over and over, as if, in his misery, he cared. They roared them in unison when he entered the common room. They howled them even as he flew at them, at first with bubbling nose and badly aimed kicks, later with headbutts, and in time with hard, freckled, lightning-fast fists. They were more wary when he moved on to the fist. They began saying, "He's a lot stronger than he looks." Even so, he was still an irresistible target. In Dublin's fair city began the smirking inventor of this glorious game, incautiously at the top of the staircase, and a minute later, there he was, swiped down, heaved up, and dangling from Michael's grift, held only by one wrist on the wrong side of the banister. The crowd around immediately switched alliance and began a chant of "Drop! Drop! Drop!" The hanging boy didn't help either. "Let go! Let go!" he foolishly wailed, but luckily the Irish boy did not let go. Although his face was now dead white with orange freckles, it was Rupert who raced to grab the hanging boy's arm and held on tight. Even so, it was a job to get him back to safety. "What do you say?" demanded Rupert, when the inventor was back on his quivering legs at last. Thank you, say sorry, thank you, say thanks, sorry, I'm sorry. He gibbered and reeled away. Then Rupert and Michael looked at each other, and they were friends. They grew into the two most popular boys in school. The Irish boy's accent remained unchanged, and so did his reckless temper. They were legendary sportsmen and practical jokers. Rupert climbed the chapel roof one St. Patrick's Day and dressed the weather vane in a shamrock green. There were no more Irish ballads, not for years, not until Simon the bony one arrived on the scene. Simon's wistful grin and perilous tendency to walk into walls when Rupert was about got worse and worse. One day it happened to attract the passing attention of Rupert's friends. Michael remarked, "Watch out, Rosie, I spy a blushing swain." All in a moment, Rupert understood what would happen next. What Michael saw today, the rest of the boys would see tomorrow. The destruction of the bony one would be as inevitable as time, if he didn't think fast. Rupert did think fast. "It's your lovely little maid from school," his friend continued, and Rupert caught him in a swift and wicked headlock and crooned as he gripped him, "Don't be jealous, you mad Irish. He's nothing compared to you." After this, Rupert took her to singing Irish ballads now and then. When Irish eyes were smiling, he caroled to his raging friend. A little bit of heaven fell from the sky one day. It took the attention from the bony one completely. "Oh, do you love, oh say you love the shamrock green." He loudly serenaded his friend under the sturdy window, with the first form in stitches rolling around the quad, and Michael leaped 15 feet from the window and half killed him. In these ways, he, Rupert, had saved Simon the bony one from the ridicule of the rabble. And now apparently the silly kid was here, in Flanders. How had that happened? Why had that happened? Rupert didn't want to think about that, so he spent the evening drinking red wine that tasted as if it had something extra added, like hair oil. It was raining as if it had rained all August, September and October. The world was half liquid, the front line trenches were knee-deep in mud. If it weren't for the submerged duckboards, you'd just keep going down. You moved with the same speed that you ran in the nightmare. It was very bloody hot and very bloody cold. The temperature regulation was a complete foreign mess. His head had the strangest floating feel, as if it might detach from his neck and sail away. In 2 hours' time, his unit would be marching back up to the front again. The next morning, they would go over the top. "Oh, Danny boy," sang Rupert, the pipes are calling from glen to glen." This song had been the best of autumn vows, Michael. He turned scarlet with rage at the first syllable of Danny. You might as well set fire to his bed to see him move. It had all been guaranteed crowd pleaser. People used to come running to witness the red-headed Irish temper as their uncontrolled worst. And down the mountainside, sang Rupert, quavering deliberately on the long notes, and was ordered from all around to "Shut it, just shut it. Shut it, you fool. Rosie, you're drunk, just shut it now, all right?" So he did. Michael hadn't come running away. First time it hadn't worked. Very odd. This is all a dream. he asked a stranger he found standing by his shoulder as they set off towards the front, and was reassured to hear that it was. Chapter 37. Wild Run. Rupert woke up to the bright blue sky, a feeling of warmth and comfort, and such a fuzzy head that for several minutes he could not imagine where he was. And then, like a light flashing into the delighted consciousness, he remembered Cornwall. For a few minutes he lay quite still, dazzled by the wonder of it. He was free. No more idiots bossing him about. No more snivelling youngsters tagging after him with frightened eyes, needing a hero to look out for them. No more mud, no more itchy uniform, no more of never a moment alone. He was back in Cornwall at last. The first day of the holidays there had been a train to meet the afternoon, Clary with her face all shining, jumping into his arms. There'd be Peter and Lucy and hugs and jokes and laughter. There'd be days and days and days of utter perfection. He'd forgotten that skies could be so blue. Not a cloud. He'd go swimming. The glorious race across the moors, the brambles that caught at your ankles, the gorse bushes you dodged, and the boggy patches you leaped. Had he ever run so fast before? Already he could hear the rush of waves against the cliff and the scream of the white gulls, and off went his jacket and shirt. And was that the key to the cricket pavilion dangling round his neck? Didn't need that. Didn't need those boots either. Didn't need any of this stuff anymore. And even the sound of Clary's bullocks got loose again, and lumbering up behind him. Didn't frighten him in the least, because here was a cliff dipping down to the sea. Time to leap. Over. When you enlisted, you had to give your next of kin's name and address. These are the people who'd be given news of your death. Rupert has hesitated for a moment over this. His useless parents were in India, which left either his grandparents or Clary and Peter and their father. His grandparents at the time he enlisted had thought him a fool and told him so. Penrose, Rupert had written, and then the address of the narrow stone house where his cousin lived. He had no intention of dying, so he didn't think it would matter much anyway. Chapter 38. The Telegram. Miss Vane was the only person with Clary when the telegram arrived. It was Miss Vane who took it from her hand, wrapped her in a blanket, brought her a cup of tea, clattering it in saucers because her hands were trembling, and stayed with her when her father, arriving home to the news, rubbed his neck, said not a word of either comfort or regret, stared out of the window, and disappeared. Missing, said the telegram, and also presumed dead. Snow-cold shock held Clary motionless, silenced every sound, faded the colours to shades of grey and diminished her to the fragments of nothingness, a small lost point, rocking in an endless darkness of space. And then a sound penetrated as if from another world, and it was Miss Vane's cracked, exhausted, quavering voice. There may be hope. There may still be hope. Clary found that she could turn her head, and there was poor Miss Vane, looking utterly tear-washed, and her powder all streaked into mauve and grey. Her hair had fallen heap, her eyes pink and alarmed as sugar mice, and yet she was saying again, all hope is not lost, it. And Clary realised that at the time she had been sat in a frozen immobility. Miss Vane had been talking, and she, it seemed, had been answering, because they appeared to be halfway through a conversation. Home to my cats. Then we will think. Many wonderful and astonishing things happen when we least expect them. If shock had been cold, hope was warm. Hope brought Clary back to life, her blood running again, her courage returning. By the time Miss Vane returned from feeding her cats, Clary was back to herself again, and rhythm like a heartbeat was bumping through her mind. Wonderful and astonishing, wonderful and astonishing, wonderful and astonishing. Missing, said Clary to Miss Vane when she returned. That's all we know is true. Presumed dead doesn't mean anything, not if you don't presume it. Of course it doesn't, agreed Miss Vane. We must be patient, believe that one day the dear boy may... No, we mustn't, interrupted Clary. You said all hope wasn't lost, and perhaps it isn't, and that many wonderful and astonishing things happen, and if they sometimes do, but not in this house. No, agreed Miss Vane, startled but understanding. Not in this house. But somewhere else they might, said Clary. There are hospitals in France and in England. There are some in Southampton. That's where I'll begin. Presumed, continued Clary, looking fearlessly at the telegraph. I mean, they don't know. If I was writing it, I'd put missing, presumed alive. You would be quite right, agreed Miss Vane, finding such bravery contagious. Pete had a timetable in his room. I've been looking up trains. There's one in an hour. You needn't worry, Miss Vane. I'll be quite safe. But Miss Vane lifted her head at this. Her eyes were no longer either pink or alarmed. They were as bright as Clary's, and she said that she wouldn't and would be quite sure Clary was safe. And the reason she gave this was she was coming as well, to deal with the porters or take care of the luggage, even speak French, if necessary. And she finished this declaration with a hug and, please do not argue. And so Clary hugged her back and didn't. There were bags to pack and money to find, also messages to be written by Miss Fane to Mrs. Morgan, to Clary's father, and to Violet, now a trusted member of the Red Cross group. These messages consisted of triplicate instructions for the care of Miss Fane's cats, each including descriptions of how to deal with the beast heart in the icebox, the individual names of the cats, and a discreet but urgent reference to the earth box in the scullery. Mrs. Morgan and Violet were instructed to obtain the door key entrusted to Mr. Penrose at number 46. The door key was carefully labelled. Mrs. Morgan and Violet's letters were stamped and posted along with Clary's far briefer message to Peter. Aunt missing, am sure not dead. Take care of father. Much love, C. All these things Clary and Miss Fane managed with a miraculous speed. In less than an hour, they were out in the streets with their bags, and suddenly, good luck was with them. Mr. King and his black and white horse, Jester, appeared round the corner. One glance at their faces told him that this was no time for trading insults with Miss Fane. With the utmost gentleness and discretion, he offered his assistance in any way they cared to name. So their journey began, as honoured passengers in a rag and bone cart, Clary in the back and Miss Fane on the seat beside Mr. King, where she was cheering view of Jester's black and white rump and intelligently swivelling ears. I fear I've misjudged you far too long, Mr. King, said Miss Fane earnestly. I can only apologise and try to assure you that I only ever had Clary's interests at heart. Say not a word, replied Mr. King, pulling off his hat and holding it to his chest. I should have shown more respect. Now I can see that you are one in a million. I am glad to do my bit to help, and I wish it was more. Then silently, and with great furtiveness, the glances over his shoulder, he replaced his hat, drew an old black wallet from its snug pocket over his heart, took out 3 warm and well-folded notes, all the paper it contained, pushed them into Miss Fane's hand and murmured once more, say not a word. Miss Fane could not speak at all. Such were her sudden tears, but when they were over, her old distrust of Mr. King was completely gone. With no encouragement, she recklessly confided her great concern for her cats, which, despite the 3 sets of instructions, she found already gnawed at her soul. The whole arrangement depends, explained Miss Fane earnestly, on whether or not Mr. Penrose will be available to supply my key. Owing to his work, he is seldom at home, and even if he is, I cannot imagine either he or Violet coping with the beast heart properly, and none of them managing the arrangements in the scullery on which my oldest cat depends. Mr. King said that he well understood, and that his old mother had never been without a cat in all her long years, and that he and Jester always had one knocking about the stable. Company-like, said Mr. King. Indeed, yes, agreed Miss Fane, and by the end of the journey her spare door key was in the pocket, and he was helping her down and loading the bags and swinging Clary over the back. Now then, ladies, good luck, and God bless, he told them, and a moment later he was up on the cart again. Lively, Jester, they heard, and saw a hat wave as he turned the corner. Clary, that is a very dear man, said Miss Fane, gazing after him. Yes, agreed Clary, it is. Chapter 39, Odyssey. Simon and Vanessa's father, whom Clary had named Odyssey, had not been a good prisoner. He found prison camp life uncomfortable and boring, and he didn't enjoy eating rats. So he and some friends dug a tunnel beside the latrines, and one happy morning they allowed it to be discovered. And while it was being thoroughly and indignantly explored, they rolled, one by one, under the section of the loosened wire, whispering good luck to each other, and set off to see what would happen next. Odyssey made it to the coast and followed it west through the countryside, travelling mostly by night. In a few days he came to a fishing port, hid under a pile of nets in a boat, and was well on his way to Greece, when they discovered him and dropped him over the side to swim. The stars were bright and lovely, and being a sailor he was used to navigating at night, and so he set off across the Aragon. And presently the sun rose, and he saw a long cloud with a coastline below it, and knew he had nearly reached Greece. Odyssey had been to Greece many times, sailed the coast and climbed the hills and danced at the festivals, so he paused there to dry out for a while. He was aided by the kindness of a family who accepted him with the grapes and olive tree, and in return gave him a home. They became such friends that it was hard to leave them. Still he had to go and promised to return, so one day they waved him goodbye on a fishing boat with a big red sail, and a little boy and a man with a broken arm. The red sail boat ran so beautifully for him that he might have known her all his life. They fished for 3 days and 3 nights, and on the 4th day they took him further west. They dropped him off at a harbour where the water was clear as glass. Just as he arrived, a very small boy went scampering along the harbour wall and tumbled off into the sea. Odyssey dived in after him and got him out, and then sat him on his shoulder and carried him to his father. The boy's father took Odyssey home for a lot of dinner with grilled fish and bread and tomatoes and pale cheese and dark red wine. With these and many other adventures, Odyssey passed through the pearly light dancing, sea-swirling land of Greece, and then over to the Mediterranean in a cargo ship to Spain. Travelling through Spain was not easy, but still better than the prison camp where he might yet have been deciding whether the rat for dinner should be boiled or roasted. Eventually, with the help of some gypsies who knew the same songs as him, Odyssey arrived at Gibraltar, which seemed practically next door to home. He would have written from England there, but there happened to be a ship sailing the night whose captain had known him 20 years before, when they were both very young and often seasick. It was too good a chance to waste, so Odyssey didn't wait, but went aboard and shared the captain's cabin all the way back to Southampton. Odyssey, after disembarking with 2 borrowed £5 notes in his pocket and a promise to meet his friend again at Duke Wellington at Bugle Street as soon as the blast of war was over, thought, I wonder if my Vanessa is still at that hospital. So he went to see. And she was. Chapter 40. Rupert is missing. The return of the Odyssey to his loving family could not have been better timed for Clary and Miss Vane. When they arrived in Southampton, they found Vanessa, who was very like him, in a mood to believe that anything was possible. Such was her elation that, unlike Clary, she ignored the second half of the telegram from the start. Missing! Missing! Exclaimed Vanessa. Rupert missing! Rubbish! What does that even mean? Hello, Miss Vane. I didn't see you there. How darling of you to come. Go on about Rupert. I've got news for you too, but it'll wait. I told you we had a telegram early this afternoon. I had to come away. You know what Father's like, and the house is a hopeless house. Anyway, I couldn't bear doing nothing, and neither could Miss Vane. So you took to your heels? I would have done too. I thought straight away of hospitals and you. Does Peter know? Not yet. He will tomorrow, I wrote. You don't mind his coming, do you? Of course I don't mind. Come to our little staff room. It's a hovel, but never mind. Tell me more, and tell it quickly, because I have to be on duty very soon. Whoops, don't sit on the cup, Miss Vane. No one has time to wash up. Vanessa, we'd have heard if he was taken prisoner, but could he be in a hospital and no one knowing his name? Well, Vanessa hesitated. Well, Clary, darling, we usually do know their names at least, if not where they've come from, but... Oh, Miss Vane, you don't have to do that. The sink's piled. There are dozens. Well, you're an angel. That's all. Missing. It's so vague, Clary. But what do they really know? Remember when they told us my dad was a prisoner? That wasn't true for long. Wasn't it? What have you heard, Vanessa? He wasn't a prisoner for 5 minutes, said Vanessa triumphantly. I've been bursting to tell you. I saw him off on the train to Mummy's this morning, tiddly as a fish. He's back. Oh, how wonderful. Escaped, just like we knew he would. Came back through Greece and the Med. He had a wonderful time, so you see. Yes, I do, Vanessa. Listen, you know thousands of people in hospitals. Hundreds, said Vanessa modestly. Ask them, and ask their friends, and ask their friends to ask their friends. 2 things. I've worked it out. Go on. Have they ever, in say the last month, heard of anyone in a military hospital whose name isn't known? And has anyone heard about Rupert? Rupert Penrose. I've written down the last address I had, and his regiment and number, and anything I could think of that might be useful. He started off in a Devon battalion, but then he changed it a year or more ago. I'll ask people, Clary. And I need a list of military hospitals where he might have been sent. But Vanessa, what if he's still in France, too ill to move? Well, said Vanessa sensibly, he'll be taken care of, and as soon as they can, he'll be sent over here. Miss Vane, enterprisingly drying teacups on her handkerchief, looked around to say, families of very sick soldiers are invited over to France if they can travel. The Red Cross arranges it. But if he was in hospital anywhere, you'd have been told, said Vanessa, unless he's too ill to talk and he's lost his ID. I suppose in that case he might not easily have reached England yet. They had to be stable enough for the journey before they're sent back home. Then we need to ask the French hospitals too. Clary, do you know how many hospitals there are in France and Belgium? No. There must be 100. Base hospitals where they're brought from the field stations before they get here. You'd never manage it. You need a passport, and if you did, you'd never get round a 10th of them. I know, but I could write, and if I heard anything, work out a way to get there. And meanwhile, there's still hospitals here. I wish I could go overseas, said Vanessa. I applied as soon as Simon went. They won't let me, though. You have to be 23, and they check. Now listen, Clary, promise me something. You mustn't tell Simon about Rupert being missing. I've been worrying about that too. He couldn't bear it. He believed the worst. I'll do anything I can help you as long as you don't tell Simon. Promise. Promise. But he might not hear anyway. Not yet. Perhaps not for ages. It's hell over there right now. You must make Peter promise too. He will. He'll understand. All right. Good. Here's Emma. Emma, this is my great friend Clary and darling Miss Vane. They've lost lovely, lovely Rupert. Good Lord, look at our teacup, said Emma. Not your lovely, lovely Rupert, Vanessa. I borrowed him. He wasn't mine. I was just trying to cheer him up. Never, thought Vanessa remorsefully. Must Clary know the lengths to which she had gone trying to clear Rupert up? Or Peter. Peter must never know. It hadn't worked anyway. I know he wasn't really yours, said Emma cheerfully, remembering her own brief fling with Rupert. He had lots of girlfriends, he told me, from Ireland, London, all over the place. Anyway, what do you mean lost? Stop talking rubbish and listen, Emma. Clary is Rupert's cousin. She and her brother are next of kin. They've just had a telegram. Oh, I'm sorry, said Emma, looking absolutely stricken. Oh, it happened to us. Last year. My brother. Not the same, said Vanessa impatiently. Emma, will you look after Clary and Miss Vane for me? I can't believe I already owe matron for this morning, seeing Dada from the station. Clary, where are you staying? Anywhere, somewhere cheap. I've an aunt who does rooms, said Emma, if it helps. Chapter 41, The Great Search. That was how the great search for Rupert began. Practical things kept them busy. Clary remembered how Peter had the picture of their mother reprinted, and she got out her own photograph of Rupert. They had it turned into postcards, 100, for 30 shillings. Please give me one of those for old time's sake, begged Emma when she saw them. By the end of the first week, Claire had the address of 60 base hospitals in France and Belgium, and she and Miss Vane had written to every one of them. Also, the Southampton hospitals had been checked. A long chain of nurses, VAD patients, ex-patients and friends had been contacted by way of telegram and postcard and asked to send back news. As well as this, Violet, Saltlort tram conductress and a dedicated packer of gloves and socks, had been contracted and had reported back on the states of the cats. Stuff, but your dad's in a shocking mood, Clary. Let me know when you have come home and face the music, and I'll come along with you to see fair play. Miss Vane's energy seemed endless. In between everything else that had to be done, the little staff room at Vanessa's hospital had been polished to gleaming point, all the cupboards turned out, and paintwork washed. Please stay forever, many people begged her, and Miss Vane had earnestly explained about her cats. Peter wrote, yes, I'll go round the local hospitals, but I can't pretend that I don't think it's hopeless. How is Vanessa? Are you managing for money? What about your school? Have you told them? I'm enclosing £14. I'm afraid to borrow most of it. I love your brother, said Vanessa when she read this. I don't see how anyone could lose his ID tags, whatever happened to him. Vanessa said that in an up and well enough for light-duty patients and got a sideways look. What? She asked. Well, you'd know if you'd ever been out there, would I? I don't want to upset you, but not everyone gets found. I know. Supposing, I'm not saying it happened, but supposing I was out after a charge or a lot of shell fire or something, and I came across some poor chap and I thought I should take his tag, let someone know. Yes, and it was raining, deep in mud, and I had maybe a minute to get back out of it. Probably dark coming on, or dark altogether. You wouldn't be out there if it wasn't. His tags are on a cord. You've got to get it out from under his jacket or whatever, pull it over his head or cut it with something, take one off and leave one behind. That's what you're supposed to do, and you're thinking all the time you need to get back. Yes, said Vanessa compassionately, seeing the fright in her eyes. Come on, sit down. You're out of it now. Thank you so much for telling me. I don't mind. It's in my head anyway. But you can see how things go wrong. So easily now. Good. There's other ways too. Things get mixed, you see. Chaps write a letter, give it to their friend, send that home if I don't come back. And the wrong one cops it, and suddenly he's got a letter in his pocket, and that gets sent back to England. Goodbye, pat the dog from me. You are the best. Sorry about all the swearing. Only it's not his letter, it's his mate, and his mate's not dead after all. Now I've upset you. I'm never upset, said Vanessa. Never. How's the arm? I can still feel it. Everyone says that. Always wanted to drive a car. Never be able to now. You absolutely will, said Vanessa. Like to know how. Next time I get a weekend off, I'll bring my dad's car back here and we'll take it off for a ride. You drive him. Oh yes, dare you? You wouldn't. Wait and see if I wouldn't, said Vanessa, back in her normal state and prepared, as usual, to do anything, absolutely anything to cheer someone up. Later she related these examples of confused identity to Clary, with some of the details omitted. You see, said Clary triumphantly, we're going to London tomorrow. Miss Vane's got a map and a list of possible hospitals, all marked on to the different coloured inks. She's wonderful. She's loving this. So many people have been wonderful. You and Emma and Violet. Violet's going to brave my father and see if any letters have arrived. You'll hear more, Emma had told them. When we lost Tristan, so many people wrote, his officer and a nurse who treated him for a day or two, his friends and a chaplain. Oh, Emma, how kind, Clary had exclaimed. It helped, Emma had said. It helped us face it. In his darkest parts of nights, when the blackout blotted the windows and Miss Vane was snoring gently on the other side of the room, Clary faced it. Rupert dead. And she couldn't believe it. She thought, as Emma's mother had thought when she lost Tristram, as people had thought since the beginning of time. If he were dead, I'd know. And that's where we're going to leave it for today. So we've only got a little bit left. Hopefully I can finish it all for you next week. do they find Rupert? That is the question. Right, have a lovely weekend, and I will see you all next week. Take care. Bye.